It began with Prejudice, an arrogant man doubting the hands that could save him. What followed was a twist no one in that hospital corridor saw coming. The afternoon sun slanted through the hospital's wide windows, pouring a cascade of golden light across the sterile linoleum floor. The rays softened what might have otherwise been an unfeeling corridor of white walls and metal doors. Instead, the hall looked momentarily transformed, less like a place of suffering, more like a sanctuary holding countless stories in fragile balance. Shadows stretched long, bending over rows of waiting chairs and shimmering faintly against the polished surface of the floor. The air was steady, cool, held together by the low hum of the air conditioning system. That gentle mechanical drone mixed with the faint but constant chorus of hospital life, the rhythmic beeping of distant monitors, the soft shuffle of shoes against tile, the occasional rustle of paperwork carried swiftly in the hands of busy nurses. Each sound carried a certain urgency, yet it was muffled by professionalism. The sort of quiet efficiency that wrapped the building in an odd calm dot at one end of the corridor. A group of patients sat waiting. Some were folded into themselves, staring at the ground as if counting the seconds until relief. Others leaned back, heads tilted toward the ceiling, eyes closed against the fatigue of illness and long hours. A mother gently rocked her child, the boy's eyelids drooping heavy with fever. His small body curled into her arms as though seeking shelter from the weight of the world. Across from them, an elderly man clutched a newspaper, but hadn't turned a page in half an hour. His hands trembled faintly, though he tried to hide it by holding the paper firmly, as though bracing himself against the creeping reminder of his own fragility. The staff moved with a rhythm that seemed rehearsed yet never mechanical. Each nurse carried a clipboard, each doctor a patient's file. Yet their faces were not hardened into detachment. Their urgency did not lack humanity, it was urgency fueled by responsibility. They walked briskly, but leaned down to listen when someone called. They moved quickly, but slowed their stride when they saw a worried family member pacing. In this place, time mattered, but so did presence. A faint fragrance of disinfectant lingered in the air, cutting through the faint aroma of coffee drifting from a staff lounge at the far end. The mixture created a strange paradox: sterility, mixed with comfort, a reminder that within these walls, exhaustion was inevitable. Yet the work never ceased. Even the fluorescent lights, though dimmed by the flooding sunlight, seemed to hum in solidarity, standing watch until the day surrendered to night. The corridor carried an unspoken tension, something every hospital shares. It was the silent acknowledgement that every room, every bed, carried a battle no one else could truly see. Behind some doors lay victory, the relief of test results, the joy of healing, the sigh of reassurance. Behind others lay fear, despair, or grief waiting to be acknowledged. Yet the hall itself absorbed these extremes and held them together, like a book binding chapters of life that were never meant to be separated. As the sunlight shifted, the atmosphere thickened with the peculiar stillness that comes just before something changes. The golden hue painted faces with a fragile warmth, masking fatigue lines and cloaking worry in gentle color. But under that soft light, one could sense the undercurrent of stories about to unfold, lives crossing paths, strangers, becoming witnesses to each other's frailty. For a moment, the hospital felt like a theater before the curtain lifted. Every element was in place, the backdrop of pale walls, the cast of patients and staff, the lighting carefully arranged by nature itself. The tension wasn't loud, wasn't dramatic. It was subtle, a breath held, a pause before the inevitable turn. Somewhere in the background, a phone rang once, then twice, before being silenced by a brisk hand. The sound of rubber soles against the floor drew closer, the rhythm distinct from the others, firm, steady, authoritative. Nurses glanced up, recognizing the familiar cadence, then continued their tasks, reassured by the presence it signaled. And in that glowing corridor, with sunlight retreating inch by inch, a story of doubt, of prejudice, and of unexpected redemption was quietly preparing to be told. From the far end of the corridor, a tall figure emerged, measured steps, shoulders straight, a quiet strength wrapped in a crisp white coat. Dr. Elijah Carter. He couldn't have been more than his early 30s, but there was something timeless in his demeanor, an old soul beneath youthful skin. His eyes were the kind that truly saw people, not just symptoms. Deep brown, steady, and calm, they gave the sense that even in chaos, he would not falter. His presence carried a gravity that was not loud, but deeply grounding, like a lighthouse in fog, or the first inhale after panic. His skin, a deep bronze, kissed by the afternoon sun, gleamed softly under the corridor's golden light. A stethoscope hung neatly around his neck. His badge, slightly worn around the edges, read Elijah Carter, MD, Internal Medicine. Though he walked with quiet composure, his senses were alert. Every flicker of movement in the corridor, every subtle wince on a patient's face, every pause in a nurse's tone, he registered it without needing to speak. It wasn't simply medical training. It was his nature. He listened not just with his ears, but with his entire being. As he passed the waiting area, a child coughed softly. Without breaking stride, he turned his head and gave the mother a small, not gentle, reassuring, a silent "you're not alone." The woman exhaled and held her child a little closer, the worry in her eyes softening. That was Elijah, a healer not only of bodies, but of fear. But not everyone received him with warmth. In room 214, behind a half-closed door, sat a man named Howard Greene. Howard was in his mid-50s, though illness and stress had carved deeper lines into his face than the years alone. His skin was pale, almost waxen, and beaded with a sheen of stubborn sweat. He sat on the edge of the hospital bed as though he resented being there at all. His posture was rigid, his jaw clenched, his eyes icy blue and sharp flicked to the doorway the moment Elijah stepped. "In Mr. Greene," Elijah said softly, voice low, controlled. Howard's eyes narrowed slightly. "You're the doctor." It wasn't a question. "Not really. It was an evaluation." "Yes, sir." "Dr. Carter." Elijah's tone remained warm, even. He extended a hand. Howard looked at it, paused, then shook it with reluctant force. The grip was telling, not firm from confidence, but tight from control. The kind of handshake that said, "I won't be the weaker one here." Howard's fingers trembled faintly as he released. Elijah pulled a stool close and sat across from him, lowering himself to eye level. Not towering, not asserting dominance, just meeting the man where he was. "I understand you've been experiencing some chest discomfort," Elijah began. Flipping open the patient file. Howard shifted. "It's nothing. Probably indigestion. I don't even know why I let them drag me in here." Elijah looked up. "You didn't feel well at work?" Howard exhaled slowly, dizzy, but short of breath. My assistant panicked. His tone carried a hint of bitterness, like being helped had bruised something inside him. Elijah nodded, listening, not interrupting. Howard's eyes drifted briefly to Elijah's hand, strong, steady, with short, clean nails and calluses that told of years of practice. But the gaze didn't linger long. It returned to his face, and Howard's jaw tensed. "You've been doing this long?" Howard asked, tone casual, but edged. Elijah's lips curved slightly. "Long enough to know that men like you usually wait to." "Long before coming in." Howard didn't smile. "I meant," he hesitated, "how long have you been a doctor?" The unspoken words hovered heavy between them. Elijah didn't flinch. "I completed my residency 8 years ago," he replied. "Board certified in internal medicine, worked in cardiac intensive care for 4 of those years." Howard raised an eyebrow. Impressive. But the word felt hollow, almost reluctant, as though acknowledging Elijah's competence cost him something. There was silence for a moment. The distant beeping of a heart monitor in another room filled the space. Elijah leaned forward slightly. "Do you mind if I take a listen to your heart and lungs?" Howard exhaled sharply through his nose, like someone tolerating inconvenience. "Fine." As Elijah placed the cold diaphragm of the stethoscope against his chest, Howard flinched. But what Elijah heard was more telling than the man's pride would allow. A subtle irregularity, a faint murmur beneath the rhythm. He listened longer, shifting slightly, then quietly moved to check his blood pressure. Howard remained still, but his eyes kept flicking back to Elijah, studying him, as though trying to reconcile something that didn't fit his assumptions. Elijah, on the other hand, moved with a quiet rhythm, professional, but never rushed, gentle, but precise. His face remained unreadable, except for the subtle crease forming between his brows as the numbers confirmed what he suspected. When he finished, he pulled the stool back, sat down again, and met Howard's eyes. "I like to run an EKG," Elijah said calmly, "just to be safe." Howard's mouth tightened. "You think it's serious?" "I think it's worth not ignoring," Elijah replied. "You've got a strong heart, but it's under strain, and your body's trying to tell you something." Howard's eyes flicked downward. For a moment, something cracked, barely visible, a flicker of fear, but then it hardened again. "All right, do what you have to do." Elijah nodded. "I will." And he meant it not just medically, but humanly. Because beneath the chart, beneath the symptoms, Elijah could already see the deeper illness, not just physical, but something older, something shaped by years of mistrust, by inherited ideas, by pride masquerading as strength. And he knew this was going to be more than just a diagnosis. This was going to be a reckoning. The room seemed smaller once Dr. Carter settled into it. The walls, painted an unassuming beige, caught the fading sunlight through half-drawn blinds. Streaks of gold cutting across the sterile white sheets of the hospital bed. A faint scent of antiseptic lingered, sharp and clean, clinging to the corners of the room. Machines sat idle in the background, waiting. Howard Greene leaned back against the bed with a stiffness that suggested more defiance than comfort. His face was pale, jaw-tight, but his eyes were alive, restless, probing, assessing the man in front of him. Dr. Carter explained with calm precision. Your symptoms: shortness of breath, dizziness, the chest discomfort are signs we need to take seriously. I recommend running some immediate tests, starting with an electrocardiogram. It's simple, painless, and it will tell us a lot about your heart's rhythm. Howard's eyes narrowed, the corners of his mouth tightening in a way that wasn't quite a smile. That's easy for you to say. Elijah tilted his head slightly. Patient, it's my responsibility to explain in a way that helps you feel comfortable. But Howard wasn't listening to the words as much as to the man speaking them. His gaze lingered, not on the stethoscope, not on the file in Elijah's hands, but on his face's skin. You're, what, in your 30s? Howard asked, voice laced with something that wasn't curiosity. 33. Elijah answered evenly. Howard nodded slowly, but the gesture carried no warmth. And yet you're the one telling me what's wrong with my heart. He gave a short, sharp laugh that didn't belong to humor, but to disbelief. Elijah didn't rise to the bait. Yes, sir, that's my job. Howard's eyes flicked to the badge again. His lips pressed. Then, Carter. He said the name as if tasting it. Then, with a pause heavy enough to fill the room, he added, not exactly the kind of name I expected on my doctor. The words hung in the air like smoke. Elijah remained still, his face composed, but the silence that followed was louder than any protest could have been. Howard leaned forward slightly, emboldened by the quiet. Tell me, Dr. Carter, where did you do your training? Somewhere local? Or did they bring you in from one of those programs? The emphasis was subtle, but the intent wasn't. It wasn't a genuine question. It was an attempt to chip away at credibility, to question whether competence could live in the skin that Elijah wore. Northern University Medical School, Elijah said softly, voice calm, steady, residency at St. Vincent's, fellowship in cardiac care. Howard raised his eyebrows as though unconvinced. Huh, you talk real smooth, but talk's one thing. Experience is another. Elijah held his gaze. Experience is exactly what I have. At that moment, the door eased open and a nurse entered quietly, carrying a tray of supplies. She moved carefully, her eyes darting between the two men as if she could sense the tension before she even crossed the threshold. Howard looked at her, then back at Elijah. No offense, but maybe I should get a second opinion, someone else. The words cut sharper than if he had shouted. They fell into the room like shards of glass, scattering across the silence. The nurse froze, caught between duty and discomfort. Her eyes flicked to Elijah, searching for direction. Elijah remained composed, his breath measured. His voice, when it came, was quiet but carried weight. You're entitled to request another physician, but right now, what you need is attention, not delay, and I'm here, right here. Howard's jaw tightened. He opened his mouth as though to retort, but the words snagged in his throat. His chest rose and fell more quickly now. The effort of irritation layered atop the hidden labor of his struggling heart. The nurse busied herself with the tray, her hands moving faster than usual, eyes down, as though the instruments could shield her from the tension that thickened the air. Another nurse appeared at the door, drawn by some invisible signal. She stepped in quietly, carrying a fresh gown, but when her eyes landed on Howard's sharp gaze, she hesitated, glancing at Elijah with a look that was both supportive and uncertain. The silence deepened. It wasn't empty, it was charged, like the air before a storm. The subtle hum of the fluorescent light, the muffled chatter from the hallway, even the steady beat of distant monitors, all of it seemed to quiet, leaving only the pulse of human conflict. Howard finally spoke again, softer but no less cutting. You seem calm, like you've had to practice that. Elijah's voice was steady, though the weight of history sat behind it. I don't practice it. Mr. Greene, I live it. The answer was simple, yet it settled heavily. The nurses exchanged a glance brief, wordless, filled with both discomfort and a quiet admiration. They had seen this before, prejudice dressed in politeness, resistance hidden behind questions. And they had seen Dr. Carter weather it without anger, without retreat, but still the air in the room had shifted. Every word, every pause, had drawn invisible lines between them. The tension was no longer a flicker. It was a presence, thick enough that even those who entered afterward would feel it immediately. And though Howard Greene sat upright, trying to appear in control, something in his pale complexion betrayed him. His defiance was masking something deeper, not only pride, but fear, the kind of fear that made men lash out before admitting weakness, the kind that mistook suspicion for strength. And in that small, sunlit hospital room, the stage was set for a collision between doubt and truth. Dr. Carter adjusted his stethoscope, the polished metal catching a fleeting glint of sunlight before he placed it gently against Howard Greene's chest. The room was cool, the air conditioning steady, yet sweat beaded at Howard's temples, slipping down into the creases along his cheeks. His shirt clung faintly to his back, a damp patch spreading despite the chill. Elijah listened. The rhythm of the heart beneath his fingertips was not steady, it staggered. The lub-dub should have been confident, reliably, yet here it faltered, like a runner stumbling mid-stride, a skip beat here, an irregular echo there. Not immediately catastrophic, but dangerous if ignored. Howard shifted, restless. Is this really necessary? His voice was strained, though he tried to mask it with irritation. You pressed that thing against me like you're searching for treasure. Elijah lifted the stethoscope with slow precision, meeting the man's eyes briefly before moving it to another position on his chest. I am searching, Mr. Greene. Your body tells a story. I'm just trying to hear it. Howard scoffed, though it came out weaker than he intended. His breath hitched, uneven. He tried to cover it with another jab. You always talk like that. Some kind of rehearsed bedside poetry. Elijah didn't answer immediately. His attention was caught by the faint tremor in Howard's right hand. It wasn't dramatic, just a subtle shake, fingers twitching as though the body was betraying secrets the man refused to voice. Elijah made a note of it silently, his expression unreadable. Howard noticed the pause, mistaking it for doubt. See, even you don't sound so sure. Maybe I was right about asking for someone else. His tone rose slightly, sharp but shaky, the words scraping against the air. The nurse standing near the tray of supplies looked up briefly, her eyes flicking between them. She caught the tremor too, the way Howard gripped the edge of the mattress, knuckles whitening, as if holding on for control he no longer possessed. You feel warm, Elijah observed softly, reaching for the blood pressure cuff. It's this room, Howard snapped, though a drop of sweat slid down the side of his neck, betraying him. Feels like a sauna in here, but the nurse knew. The air was cool enough that she had wrapped her arms around herself moments ago. Howard was sweating from something deeper, something churning inside his body. Elijah wrapped the cuff around Howard's arm. The Velcro rasped as it fastened, loud in the hush of the room. He pumped the bolt, the rubber squeaking faintly, and the numbers began their silent climb. Howard's breath grew shallow, his chest rising quicker than before. You seem uncomfortable, Elijah noted, though his tone remained neutral. Howard gave a short laugh, brittle and forced. Uncomfortable, sitting here with you watching me like some experiment. You could say that. Elijah deflated the cuff slowly, eyes narrowing slightly as the needle wavered before settling. The reading was higher than expected, much higher, another piece of the puzzle. He removed the cuff and set it aside, his motions unhurried, deliberate. Your blood pressure is elevated, Elijah said carefully. Howard waved it off with a dismissive flick of his trembling hand. I told you, I've had a stressful day. Anybody's numbers would be high with all this fuss. His voice cracked on the last word. He cleared his throat quickly, covering it with a cough. The cough lingered along. His face flushed briefly, before paling again, like the blood in his body couldn't decide where it belonged. His hand trembled harder, forcing him to press it into his thigh as if pinning it still. Elijah leaned back slightly, studying him, not just the numbers, not just the symptoms, but the man himself. The rising pitch of his words, the strain lacing his tone, the denial clashing with the betrayal of his own body. You said earlier you felt dizzy at work, Elijah reminded him. Howard rolled his eyes. Dizzy, lightheaded, it was nothing. I skipped lunch, that's all. But the tremor in his hand contradicted him. The sheen of sweat across his brow contradicted him. The ragged cadence of his breathing contradicted him most of all. Elijah let the silence stretch, waiting. Sometimes silence revealed more than questions ever could, and true enough, Howard filled it, his voice growing sharper, louder, as though volume could drown out weakness. You people always want to make something big out of nothing. Run your tests, rack up the bills, scare patients into thinking they're dying just so you can look important. The words cut through the room, heavy and deliberate. The nurses froze, their movements stilled, caught between the professional mask and the flicker of discomfort in their eyes. They glanced at Elijah's silent questions hanging in their expressions. Would he respond? Would he challenge the disrespect? But Elijah's face remained calm, his eyes steady. He had heard such things before. Though each repetition still left its mark, he let the words pass through him, absorbing them without surrendering his composure. Howard leaned back again, chest heaving slightly with the effort of speech. His voice was strained, the anger ringing hollow beneath it. I just want a doctor who knows what he's doing. Is that too much to ask? His body betrayed him again, a sharp inhale. A faint wince across his features, as though his own chest disagreed with the performance his mouth was staging. Elijah saw it. The nurses saw it. Even Howard, for a fleeting second, realized it. But pride was a stubborn thing, refusing to bow even when the body demanded surrender. And so, the mystery thickened not in whether Howard Greene was ill, but in how long his denial could keep warring with the truth before the truth forced itself into the open. Howard Greene's voice had risen steadily with each passing minute, every sentence sharpened into something meant to wound. The strain was audible now, hidden beneath his barbs, his words fraying like rope pulled taut. You sit there, he began, his tone laced with contempt, acting like you know me, acting like you're. The next word never arrived. It caught in his throat, sliced off mid-syllable, like a tape suddenly torn from its reel. His voice collapsed into silence, his lips parted, but no sound followed. For a single breath, his expression froze in defiance. Then his face twisted violently, muscles jerking out of sync. His eyes widened, glassy, as though he had seen something terrible in the air before him. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin an ashen gray, mottled with a sickly undertone. His right hand jerked against the mattress once, twice before his entire body sagged under an invisible weight, and then, with a final broken exhale, Howard collapsed. The sound of his body hitting the sheets was deceptively soft, almost gentle, yet the weight of it struck the room like thunder. Gasps broke from the nurses at once, sharp, involuntary. The tray of instruments rattled as one of them flinched, her hand knocking against it. The metallic clink echoed far too loudly in the stunned silence. Time slowed. The golden afternoon light, still spilling through the blinds, seemed to thicken into something unreal. Every dust mote hanging like suspended stars, the hum of the air. Conditioning roared suddenly in everyone's ears, a reminder of the world still turning as this moment bended out of shape. Howard's chest rose shallowly, then faltered. His mouth opened, a desperate grasp for air, but nothing strong enough came. His body convulsed once, then stilled in frightening stillness. Mr. Greene, one of the nurses cried, already moving forward, but Elijah Carter was faster. He had risen the instant the man's voice broke, his chair sliding back with a muted scrape. Now he was at Howard's side, every motion precise, unshaken. His calmness wasn't forced, it was instinct carved by years of pressure. Get the crash cart, Elijah ordered, voice deep and commanding, cutting clean through the panic. The younger nurse bolted, her shoes squeaking against the floor. The other hovered by the bed, wide-eyed, until Elijah's steady glance locked on hers. Check the line, he said firmly, and call respiratory. Now, she snapped to motion. Grateful for direction, Elijah's stethoscope was already against Howard's chest. His brow furrowed, the rhythm was erratic, a fluttering bird battering itself against a cage. He pressed the fingers against Howard's wrist. The pulse was there, but weak, skipping dangerously. Howard, stay with me, Elijah murmured, though his voice was steady enough to sound like command, not plea. Howard's eyelids fluttered, but the consciousness behind them was slipping fast, like sand falling through fingers. His lips twitched, perhaps to form words, perhaps to fight against silence. But his body betrayed him once more. Nothing emerged. The crash cart arrived, pushed hard through the doorway, wheels screeching faintly. Another nurse appeared behind it, breathless, her face pale. Elijah had already eased Howard flat against the bed. His hands moved quickly, attaching pads, adjusting monitors, watching numbers spring to life on the screen. The jagged line confirmed what his ears and instincts already knew. The heart was fighting, but faltering. Irregular spikes punctuating the monitor like warning flares. Vitals unstable. One nurse whispered, panic edging her tone, "I know." Elijah said softly, his hands never hesitated. The room was alive with sound, now the beeping of monitors accelerating into chaos. The shuffle of nurses preparing equipment. The clipped voices of staff outside calling for support. But for Elijah, the world narrowed to a single man, a single failing heart. Every clue he had noticed earlier, the tremor, the sweat, the uneven breathing, was converging now. Demanding resolution. Howard's chest convulsed once, shallow and jerky. Then the monitor line stuttered. "Charging," Elijah said, his voice firm, controlled. He prepared the defibrillator, the hum rising like a storm in the wires. The nurses exchanged a look, fear in their eyes. Elijah caught it, but he didn't falter. "Stay focused." He reminded them, "We're bringing him back." Time bent again. The rising hum seemed to stretch into eternity, seconds dragging like hours. The sunlight dimmed slightly as a cloud passed, plunging the room into a muted half-light. As though the world outside sensed the fragile balance inside. "Clear," Elijah commanded. The paddles pressed. A sharp jolt, a violent arch of Howard's body, and then a sickening stillness. The monitor line wavered, then spiked irregularly again. "Not enough." "One more," Elijah said, determination lacing his calm tone. "Charging." The nurses moved. Quickly, their fear now sharpened into focus under his steady hand. "Clear." Another jolt, another convulsion. The line stuttered, then settled into a rhythm, faint but real, jagged but alive. The monitor's beep steadied, uneven but refusing to flatline. Relief surged in the room like a sudden flood. The younger nurses' shoulders sagged, her eyes damp. Another nurse exhaled audibly, as though she had been holding her breath for minutes. But Elijah did not celebrate. He leaned forward, listening again, watching carefully. Howard's breaths were shallow, but they were breaths. His pulse, faint but present, tapped beneath Elijah's fingers. The man who had doubted him, who had challenged every word, lay powerless now, suspended between life and death, and only Elijah's skill had kept him from slipping further into the dark. "Stabilize him," Elijah instructed softly, almost to himself as much as to the room. "He's not gone yet." The nurses obeyed without hesitation, their movements smoother now, galvanized by his certainty. Howard's eyes fluttered again. For a brief second, they opened, unfocused, drifting. They met Elijah's face, blurred, perhaps, but unmistakably. The same face he had dismissed only minutes before, and in that fleeting glance, something shifted. Fear overtook contempt. Vulnerability eclipsed pride. It was the look of a man who suddenly understood his life had been cradled in the very hands he had questioned. The room was still tense, the fight far from over, but for everyone present, the moment carried weight. Not just the drama of near death, but the revelation hidden inside it. The silence after the beep steadied was unlike any silence before. It was heavy, reverent, as if the entire room had bowed to the fragility of life itself. Time began to move again. The world inside room 214 was chaos balanced on the edge of a knife. Beeping monitors screamed for attention, wires tangled across the sheets, and the air was thick with urgency. Yet in the middle of it all stood Dr. Elijah Carter, steady, unshaken, his calm presence anchoring everyone else. "Keep the line steady," he instructed. His voice neither raised nor rushed. It carried the weight of command, yet it soothed like a hand laid gently on a shoulder. The nurses moved quickly, their fear now converted into focus. One adjusted the foreline, her hands trembling until Elijah's voice steadied her. Another read, out numbers from the monitor. The numbers harsh, but somehow less terrifying when heard beneath Elijah's quiet certainty. Howard lay sprawled on the bed, pale, drenched in sweat, lips parted as if still trying to finish the words that had died. Mid-sentence, his chest rose and fell unevenly, each breath shallow and strained. But Elijah stayed close, guiding his body back toward balance. "Push 1 milligram epinephrine," Elijah ordered. The nurse complied instantly, her fingers moving with new confidence. Elijah checked Howard's pulse again, weak but present. The twist of irony hung heavy in the air. Here lay a man who had questioned, doubted, even scorned the doctor, now bent over him. The same mouth that had dismissed Elijah's competence had frozen in shock before collapsing, leaving his very survival in the hands he had mistrusted. But Elijah didn't falter. He didn't hesitate. He didn't pause to reflect on the insult, didn't even let it graze his focus. The man was a patient, and patients were lives, and to Elijah, a life had no price tag, no hierarchy, no condition. His oath was clear: save first, reckon later. Heart rates climbing, the younger nurse announced, her voice almost breaking with relief as the monitor beeped into a steadier rhythm. Elijah gave a single nod, eyes locked on the man before him. Good. Keep monitoring. Let's stabilize him. Howard's eyelids fluttered, his breath catching weakly. For the first time since collapsing, his face softened not with anger or scorn, but with something rawer: vulnerability, fear. He was no longer the man holding his pride like armor, no longer the one spitting judgment. He was simply human, fragile, cradled between life and death. Stay with me, Mr. Greene, Elijah said quietly, adjusting the oxygen mask over his nose and mouth. His voice carried no triumph, no reprimand, only an unwavering steadiness. Howard's lips twitched beneath the mask. Perhaps he tried to speak, but the effort failed. His eyes flickered open just enough to meet Elijah's face. It was a look that held volumes: astonishment, disbelief, and a dawning realization that was almost painful to witness. The irony pressed into him with undeniable clarity. The very man he had dismissed was the one pulling him back from the abyss. The nurses saw it too. They exchanged quick glances, eyes wide, breaths caught. The room carried a silent, unspoken truth. None of them could have done what Elijah had just done. His calm, his speed, his expertise, it had made the difference between a name written in the obituaries and a man breathing, alive, before them now. Howard blinked slowly, a tear forming at the corner of his eye, not from emotion perhaps, but from strain, the body's desperate attempt to purge itself of what it had endured. Yet the sight of it felt like something more. Elijah leaned back slightly, monitoring the steady return of rhythm on the screen. You're stable now, he said softly, more to Howard than to the team. You gave us a scare, but you're going to be all right. The nurses exhaled almost in unison, relief flooding the room like a sudden tide. One of them wiped her forehead with the back of her sleeve. Another quietly adjusted the equipment, her hands finally steady. For Elijah, there was no relief yet. His eyes remained on Howard, watching every breath, every twitch of muscle. He knew how quickly stability could fracture, how easily a heart could falter again. But in the quiet beat, between one breath and the next, he allowed himself a single thought: he's safe. For now. Howard stirred faintly, eyes searching. They locked onto Elijah once more. At this time, there was no denial, no contempt, only an expression that trembled between shame and gratitude. Though the man's lips could form neither word, the revelation was undeniable, etched into the silence that followed the storm of panic. The man who had doubted Elijah Carter's ability to heal, the man who had questioned his right to wear the white coat, to bear the title of doctor, the man who had demanded someone else, had been pulled back from death's edge by the very doctor he had dismissed. And in that paradox, the truth was illuminated. Elijah did not seek vindication. He did not look for acknowledgement in Howard's eyes, nor did he require an apology. His work had spoken for him. His hands had answered the question Howard had asked with suspicion. His skill had been the rebuttal to prejudice. The irony was sharp, yes, but it was also profound. For life, in its rawest moments, strips away illusion, pride falters, judgment crumbles. And what remains is the undeniable truth of shared humanity. Howard, weak and trembling, blinked again. His chest rose a little steadier. His breath whispered through the mask. His eyes closed, not from surrender, but from exhaustion. Elijah placed a hand gently on the rail of the bed. Rest, he said quietly, almost as if speaking to the silence itself. You're safe now. And the room, still humming with machines and faint movement, seemed to acknowledge the truth of those words. The storm had passed, but its echo lingered in the hospital room. The machines still hummed. Monitors still pulsed with green lines across black screens, and the faint hiss of oxygen whispered rhythmically into the mask resting over Howard Greene's face. The urgency that had filled every corner only minutes ago was now replaced by something heavier. Quiet. Howard stirred first with the faint twitch of his fingers. His eyelids fluttered weakly, lashes brushing against damp skin as though it took more effort than it should just to open them. For a long moment, his eyes struggled to focus shapes bleeding together, light stinging them. Then slowly, the blur sharpened and the world came into fragile clarity. Above him, the pale ceiling stretched indifferent. To his right, the steady green blip of the heart monitor marked each fragile beat. To his left stood a figure tall, steady, composed. Dr. Elijah Carter. Howard blinked, his throat dry, a low rasp escaping that wasn't quite a word. His chest ached, as though invisible hands had wrung it tight and only just released their grip. He tried to push himself upright, but his muscles betrayed him, trembling with weakness. Elijah leaned forward immediately, one hand resting lightly against the bed rail, the other adjusting the pillow so Howard could rest at an incline without straining. His movements were precise yet gentle, as though handling something delicate, breakable. "Don't try to move too quickly," Elijah said softly. His voice was calm, low, steady, the same voice that had directed chaos into order, the same voice that had pulled Howard back from the cliff. "You need to give your body time to recover." Howard's lips parted, but no words came. Shame, thick and bitter, pressed down on his chest heavier than an oxygen mask. His eyes flickered toward Elijah's face, and for the first time since they'd met, there was no contempt in them, no suspicion, only the heavy silence of a man who had seen the truth and had no strength left to deny it. The nurses lingered quietly near the foot of the bed, their movements softer now, almost reverent. One checked the floor line, another noted vitals on a clipboard, but none spoke. They knew instinctively that this moment was not medical, it was human. Howard swallowed with difficulty, the sound audible in the stillness. His lips moved again, this time managing the faintest whisper. You saved." His voice cracked. "I finished." Elijah's expression didn't change. No pride, no hint of "I told you so." Only the same calm professionalism he had carried from the beginning. He leaned slightly closer so Howard wouldn't have to strain. "You're safe now," Elijah said simply. The words settled over the room like a blanket, warm and undeniable. They carried no accusation, no demand for recognition, just reassurance. A truth spoken without ornament. Howard closed his eyes briefly, as if the weight of those words pressed too heavily against the raw edges of his conscience. When he opened them again, the tears at their corners glistened, not dramatic, not deliberate, but unbidden, spilling from the crack in the armor he had worn along. For so long, his pride had been his fortress, his scorn his weapon. But in this moment, lying frail and humbled in the very bed he had once sat upon defiantly, those defenses had crumbled. What was left was only a man weak, frightened, and grateful in ways he didn't yet know how to voice. The silence stretched, filled only by the faint mechanical sounds of the machines. Howard's gaze remained fixed on Elijah, searching, perhaps, for bitterness in his eyes, perhaps expecting it. But there was none. There was only calm compassion, quiet strength, a steadiness that spoke louder than words. "I am not here to judge you. I am here to heal you." Howard's lips trembled. He turned his face slightly away, not to hide entirely, but because the shame of being seen like this fragile, indebted to the very man he had disdained was almost unbearable. His breath shuddered beneath the mask. The nurse by the foot of the bed glanced up, her eyes softening as she caught Elijah's calm posture, the stillness in his expression. It struck her this was what true strength looked like, not in the saving of a life alone, but in the refusal to let bitterness poison compassion. Howard tried again, his voice hoarse. "I was wrong." The words were fractured, jagged, heavy. They carried not just the weight of the last hour, but a year's. Elijah did not respond immediately. He simply adjusted the blanket across Howard's chest, ensuring he was warm. Then, finally, he spoke in that same steady voice. "Rest. The test will tell us more, but right now, your body needs time." Howard's throat tightened. He wanted to say more, an apology, an explanation, something, but exhaustion pulled him back. His eyelids drooping heavily, he fought it briefly, then surrendered, slipping into a fragile, healing sleep. The nurses quietly exited the room, one by one, leaving Elijah by the bedside. For a long moment, the doctor stood in silence, his hand resting lightly on the rail of the bed. His eyes lingered on Howard, not in judgment, but in thought. Then he turned, his white coat trailing softly. As he moved toward the door, the golden afternoon light met him once again as he stepped into the corridor. The world outside still moving, still waiting. Inside the room, Howard Greene lay quietly, his life preserved by the very hands he had doubted, And though he slept, a truth had been planted within him, a truth that would not fade when morning came. The room settled into silence once more, broken only by the rhythmic beeping of monitors that testified to life still clinging on. The storm of fear and the rush of adrenaline had passed, leaving behind a fragile calm that seemed almost sacred. Dr. Elijah Carter stepped out into the corridor, his shoulders straight, his expression composed. To a passing glance, he looked like any other doctor finishing another long shift, tired, steady, purposeful. But for those who had witnessed what had just transpired, he was more than that. He was a reminder and unshakable truth clothed in white. Inside the room, Howard Greene lay asleep, his breath shallow but steady, his face, drained of the bitterness it had carried only an hour before, looked almost peaceful. The lines etched deep by years of pride and prejudice had softened in exhaustion. In his unconscious state, he was not a man clinging to superiority. He was simply human, frail, mortal, and indebted to another. And perhaps when his eyes opened again, the weight of that reality would not let him return unchanged. The corridor beyond the patient's door was bathed in the fading hues of sunset. Golden light stretched across the polished floor, broken by the shadows of passing nurses and families waiting anxiously for news. Each carried their own stories, their own burdens, and yet, within this place, they were united by one truth: illness did not discriminate. A heart did not beat differently because of color. Breath did not rise and fall in alignment with prejudice. Mortality was the great equalizer. The irony was sharp and undeniable. Howard Greene had walked into the hospital that day with suspicion, heavy in his gaze, with words ready to diminish the man assigned to heal him. He had questioned Elijah's worth, his ability, his right to hold the title of Dr. All because of the color of his skin. Yet when the moment of reckoning arrived, when his own body betrayed him, and the thin veil of control he clung to was torn away, it was Elijah's hands, Elijah's mind, Elijah's unwavering calm that anchored him to life. The lesson hung in the air, not spoken, but felt. Prejudice blinds. It convinces us of lies, painting strength as weakness, covering truth with shadows of ignorance. It had blinded Howard until life itself stripped away his illusion, leaving him naked before the reality he had refused to see. Prejudice crumbles in the face of mortality, when breath is stolen, when the body collapses, when time itself narrows into fragile seconds. The only thing that matters is the hand that reaches out to save you. And in that moment, character is revealed not in the one who judges, but in the one who heals despite judgment. Dr. Elijah Carter did not carry anger in his heart as he leaned over the man who doubted him. He did not let bitterness shape his hands, nor did he falter beneath the weight of insult. Instead, he revealed something stronger than resentment: compassion. And compassion is a language beyond color, beyond pride, beyond ignorance. It is a truth that cannot be denied. Howard Greene, when he awoke fully, would carry the memory of his collapse and his salvation for the rest of his days. Perhaps he would never find the words to fully express the shame, the regret, or the gratitude that churned inside him. Perhaps he would try and fail, stumbling over apologies or thanks. But the lesson would linger nonetheless, carved into him by the silence of that hospital room and the unwavering presence of the man he had once rejected. In time, he would remember Elijah's words, not words of triumph or accusation, but simple reassurance: you're safe now. And maybe, just maybe, he would come to understand the depth of what those words meant. Not just safety from death, but safety from the lie he had lived beneath. Safety in the truth that respect is not something dictated by appearance, but earned by character. That humanity cannot be measured by skin, but by compassion. The world outside the hospital moved on, the sun dipping lower, the city humming with life. Yet inside, something profound had unfolded, small in scale, but vast in meaning. For prejudice had been silenced, not by argument, not by confrontation, but by undeniable action, by a life saved, by compassion shown where bitterness had been received, by proof carved in the space between one failing heartbeat and the next. The narrator's voice, if it could be heard, would not be triumphant, but steady like Elijah himself. Respect and humanity are not bound by color. They are proven by character and compassion, and when the illusions of prejudice fall away, what remains is the simple truth: we are all fragile, all mortal, all in need of one another. The golden light dimmed into twilight, shadows stretching long across the hospital floors. Dr. Carter walked on, his steps quiet but resolute. Another patient waiting, another story unfolding. He did not need recognition or gratitude. His work was its own testimony. And in room 214, Howard Greene breathed, alive because of the man he had once dismissed, forever changed by the revelation that sometimes the hands we doubt are the very ones destined to lift us back from the edge.